Chapter 2 of Nip and Tuck by a Self-Made Man. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 2. Nip and Tuck Take Possession of Their Offices. On the following morning, some of the tenants of the third floor of the New Era building, Wall Street, noticed an unwanted activity at the rear of the main corridor. "Somebody's moving in," said Broker Green to Broker Brown, as they met halfway down the corridor and were obliged to step aside to allow a couple of men bearing a new roll-top desk to pass them. "Evidently," answered Brown. "I wonder who it is." "Couldn't tell you. Let's go back and see." The other broker was easily persuaded to accompany the speaker, as he was just as curious as Green to learn who his new neighbor was. The doors of both numbers 33 and 34 were ajar. Glancing into 33, the brokers saw only a small hall room with one window. It looked out on the open space, or well, in the center of the building, provided to emit light and air to the inside offices. A man was tacking down red carpet of a neat pattern. A desk was in position, 3 chairs were huddled together in one corner, and 3 or 4 steel engravings were suspended against the wall. A painter had just finished lettering the frosted glass in the upper part of the door with the legend, "Nicholas Nip, Stockbroker." "Nicholas Nip," exclaimed Broker Green. "Never heard of him, have you?" The other broker shook his head and remarked, "There seems to be 2 of them," and pointed at 34, where a painter was just completing the K in George Tuck. Both of the brokers then looked into room 34 as the men came out, who had just left the desk, and they saw that it was fitted up in a somewhat similar style, except that a rug took the place of the carpet, and the pictures were watercolor instead of steel engravings, and there was a revolving bookcase beside the desk. By this time the painter had finished a capital S and began a small T under the tenant's name, which led Green to remark, "Another stockbroker. Newcomers to the street, I apprehend. We must make their acquaintances, Brown. Perhaps we can give them a few wrinkles in the business and incidentally coax some of their dollars in our direction," with an intelligent grin which his companion evidently appreciated. "Not a bad idea, Green. I've got a few thousand shares of stock I'd like to get off my hands. None of the boys seem to want it, so perhaps I can induce Nip, or Tuck, precisely, to take the stuff." The brokers laughed and then walked away to attend to their own business. Hardly had they disappeared down a side corridor before the elevator dumped a young fellow, as chipper as a 2-year-old colt, out on the third-floor landing. It was Nicholas Nip, and he started down the corridor as if he had springs on his soles. He stopped in front of 33 and regarded the sign on the door with great satisfaction. Then, as his attention was naturally attracted to 34 by the presence of the painter, he frowned disapprovingly at the sight of the name of his particular friend and rival. "Seems to me Tuck imitates everything I do. I wonder how he tumbled to the fact that I was going into business on my own hook. He must have done so, else how comes it he hires an office for himself in this building and right alongside mine? I wouldn't be surprised if he was to bore a gimlet hole through the wall to see if he couldn't worm out some of my secrets. Tuck is a mighty good fellow socially, but when it comes to business—" "Hello, Nip!" exclaimed a cheerful voice at his elbow, and the young broker whirled around to find himself face to face with Tuck. "Admiring my sign, eh?" "Not by a jugful," growled Nip with a frown. "I was admiring my own." "I don't see much to admire about it," retorted Tuck with a grin. "Nip is a rather insignificant name when you come to think of it displayed in gilt letters on an office door." "Is that so?" snorted Nip. "I suppose you think that Tuck is ever so much better, don't you? To be perfectly frank with you, old fellow, and without the least desire to hurt your feelings, I am compelled to say I do," chuckled Tuck. "I'll bet Nip, signed to a check, will command more respect and attention than Tuck any day." "Name the amount and I'll sign you," spoke up Tuck briskly, flashing out his wad. "Oh, this is one of your tricks to find out how much capital I have. Well, it won't work." "Your capital won't? Well, I don't imagine it will after you've taken a lesson or 2 from me. Now, my capital is already at work. I bought 1,000 shares of—" "Yes?" cried Nip, becoming suddenly interested. "A certain stock and a first-class tip I got. I'm in for a rise." "What'd you say the name of the stock was?" asked Nip innocently. "If I were to tell you, you would know as much as I do about it, wouldn't you?" "Oh, said Nip, much disappointed at his failure to catch Tuck off his guard. "If I had a sure tip on a stock, I wouldn't think anything of sharing it with an old chum like you, George." "Sure thing," retorted Tuck sarcastically. "You could knock it into my office quick enough to divide it up. Say, Nip, do I look like an easy proposition?" "Tuck," said Nip solemnly, "once upon a time we swore that our friendship would be as firm and lasting as that of Pylades and Orestes." "Or Damon and Pythias." "Cert, if anybody but George Tuck attempts to do you up, let me know, and I'll be down on him like 1,000 a brick." With these words, Tuck marched into his own office to see how far advanced the furnishing of it was. Apparently everything was satisfactory. He unlocked the desk, opened the several small packages of account books, stationery, and printed blanks, and proceeded to put things in shape for a possible customer. And Nip was going through the same sort of performance in his office. "All I need now is a safe and an office boy," mused Tuck, and similar thoughts were at the same time coursing through Nip's mind. Tuck made a memorandum of the fact that he had bought that morning 1,000 shares of PD&Q at 40. "I collared the stock because I saw Astorbilt, who was a director of the PD&Q, go into Bloodgood's and stay a while. Then I followed Bloodgood to the exchange and saw him start in to buy PD&Q right and left. I've worked long enough for Bloodgood to understand some of his tactics. That stock is going up as sure as my name is Tuck. I never knew Astorbilt to call him my old boss, but something was doing in his Western Road." To buy 1,000 shares at 40 on a 10% margin at his bank, Tuck had to put up $4,000 cash, and his ability to do this showed that George Tuck, while a messenger, had been successful in accumulating a small bank account through his little plunges in the market. Singular to relate, Nip was starting into business with exactly the same bank account. Which of the two bright young fellows would come out ahead in the long run was a question time alone could answer. Before noon, several brokers who had offices in the building, and who had got wind of the new arrivals, stepped into the little hall rooms on the third floor back on one excuse or another, and made acquaintance of Nip and Tuck. They were much surprised to find that the new tenants were mere boys, and they mentally wondered how the young shavers, as they termed them, expected to do any business on Wall Street. One of the callers, named Jarius Redstone, had done considerable business with Billings and Company, and therefore recognized Nip as a former clerk of that firm. He mentioned the fact. "Yes," nodded the boy politely. "I was employed with Billings for a matter of 3 years. I began as a messenger and worked my way up to a confidential position when it occurred to me to branch out for myself. So here I am." "You look very young for a full-fledged broker." "I'm not so young but what I know how to use a wool clipper," retorted Nip, who rather resented allusions to his age. The broker laughed heartily at this, and then remarked, "I see you have a next-door neighbor who is also new to the business. Know him?" "You mean George Tuck?" The visitor nodded, and then said with a palpable sneer, "If there are any more of you coming into the street, it wouldn't be a bad idea for the exchange to start a kindergarten to teach amateur brokers the business." "Think so?" asked Nip, nettled at the broker's rude remark. "Well, let me give you a bit of advice, Mr. Redstone, and that is, don't make any more cracks like that in the future when you happen to drop in to see either me or Mr. Tuck. It's not precisely what I would call gentlemanly on your part, and we might happen to resent it in a way you wouldn't approve of. Good day." And Nip turned to his desk. "Touchy, are you?" snorted the broker, who was a big red-faced man of the belligerent type. "You'll soon have that taken out of you down here, let me tell you. It is my opinion that neither one of you innocents will last long enough in this building for the janitor to get acquainted with your names." Nip paid no attention to the man's bluster, and the broker left the office in a huff, fully determined he wouldn't do a thing to the boy if he got a chance. End of chapter 2.